wanted to find resources where there were um, opportunities to get these different point of views talking with each other, actually engaging each other. And so that's what led me to write a book on a multi-perspectival approach to leadership and change. So since dynamic discernment came out, which was back in 2019, so I've had a couple of years to get feedback. Um, the good news has been that the part of the book I was most worried about people hating, they've actually really liked. The book, Dynamic Discernment, is very pragmatic. And not unlike my sermon today, if you were present for it, the sermon was pretty practical, saying sometimes just don't go there. And the theology section of my book is similar in saying that there are certain power dynamics that just can't be fixed, and you need to learn to live with them. I thought that my liberationist UCC colleagues would slap me in the mouth for saying that sometimes you just have to deal with the fact that power is unfair. But I actually got the opposite, which was feedback that finally somebody said it, that sometimes you just need to not burn yourself out, pushing that rock up the hill yet again. So I thought you'd find that interesting. So again, my hopes for the presentation today is that you're going to leave it with that shared language of reason, emotion, and power, which are the three perspectives on change that dynamic discernment explores and that I teach in my classes and consider in all the writing that I do. So again, I've already named that this is a book and this is a topic that presents a particular perspective on how the universe is set up. So if you watch a lot of Star Trek, or if you like science fiction, you've heard of the concept of quantum realities. So quantum realities suggest that more than one reality is coexistent at the same time. That's true for Star Trek, and that's true for St. Augustine, and it's true for Jonathan Edwards. The concept that more than one reality is at work at one time is deeply theological. Similarly, this notion that change can be viewed from lots of different perspectives takes for granted that in one situation, there are many different dynamics that are all at work at the same time. So what I try to propose in my writing is that if there's more than one thing happening in an institution, then it's really useful for the leader to be able to see and read those different dynamics, because the leadership implications that flow from those dynamics can help us to be more effective. So reason is the first of the dynamics I discuss, emotion is the second, and power is the third. These correlate to those larger multidisciplinary fields I mentioned previously. Reason corresponds with the literature from the business world. Emotion from the social science world, particularly psychology and sociology. And power corresponds with liberation theology. I argue that these dynamics are always at work. And I also argue that they're not created equal when it comes to degrees of difficulty. So we're getting ready for the Olympics, evidently. We'll see if that happens. But the Olympics include one of my favorite sports to hate. My favorite sport to hate is diving. I think diving is so beautiful, and I am constantly convinced that that diver is going to whack her head so hard on that platform that I can hardly even watch the really difficult dives. Now, diving as a sport is organized around what are called degrees of difficulty. A really easy dive, like a pike dive or a swan dive, would be like a 1. A really hard dive that involves all those head banging possibilities would be somewhere more like a 4. And the judges multiply the score against the degree of difficulty. So when I use the expression degrees of difficulty in talking about reason, emotion, and power, what I'm saying is that some of them are easier for leaders to handle, and some of them are almost impossible for leaders to handle. They just have to try to find a way to live with them. So I make the argument that reason is fairly obvious. Emotion can be a little tricky, elusive, and power is downright secretive and cloaked. So with that, let's explore these one at a time. So when reason is out of whack in a community, the leader's trying to bring about a change, and reason is the problem, here's some things that you might see. The community complains of, I'm sorry, got a little overzealous there. The community complains, we're so confused. We're so confused. I thought that worship was going to be back in person by now. I'm just so confused. Where is worship? Is it online? Is it in the sanctuary? Is it outside? Is it in a box or with a fox? Confusion. The community complains that they don't really understand why change is happening or why change is necessary. Reason has to do with knowledge being needed, knowledge being necessary, and therefore the appropriate leadership practices to emphasize when the presenting issues are confusion or lack of understanding are planning and teaching. Planning and teaching are the low-hanging fruit. Leaders need to be able to do these things. Why? Because out of all the different dynamics, this is the easy one. If a person is confused, they can become unconfused. If they don't understand, you can explain. Now, the downside is that sometimes people who are well-meaning and don't want to seem like they're complaining will use words like confusion or lack of understanding because they don't want you to know how really, truly angry they are. It's a passive-aggressive maneuver. And if that's the case, then we're not in the territory of reason anymore. Instead, we've moved into the realm of emotion. Emotion, which is studied more, as I've said several times, in the social sciences. If emotion is the prevailing dynamic at work, here are some of the things that the leader might see when the leader tries to bring about change. And I hope you haven't forgotten, you should be writing down examples. We're going to need your examples pretty soon. If emotion is churning, you might see that an unlikely member of the community acts out. Usually very calm and sedate person gets up in the middle of the meeting, walks out and slams the door. Whoa, where did that come from? Emotion might be bubbling under the surface, and what you've got is the symptom bearer. You might hear that people are expressing that they're exhausted and they're burned out. Now, burnout is just recently introduced to the Diagnostic Statistics Manual as an illness. Burnout is most broadly conceived a form of depression associated with work. So workplace depression, burnout. Clinicians who work with psychology of work say that it has nothing to do with working too hard. It is related very specifically to working under impossible conditions. Burnout comes when we work toward goals that are too nebulous or impossible to obtain. So if people are expressing that they're exhausted and they're burned out, there might be an emotional issue at work where they're laboring under unrealistic expectations, where they're feeling depressed because they feel like they can't be successful. And finally, if emotion is churning, you might find that hurt feelings follow ordinary interactions. I'm sure that you've both sent and received emails apologizing for having said something awful And the response that you got, or the response that you gave, was, I didn't even remember you saying that. When emotion is churning and needs some attention from the leader, hurt feelings emerge in unlikely places when there really are other things that we should be able to focus on. So again, these are just some symptoms that tell the leader that among the different dynamics at work in leadership and change, emotion is the one that needs attention. But here's where things get tough. I said previously that if the prevailing issue is reason, namely people are confused, they don't understand what the institution is doing and why it's doing it, then the best thing for the leader to do is to explain stuff better. And if emotion is the prevailing issue, explaining stuff better makes no difference. In fact, it just pisses people off because they are feeling emotional and you're trying to reason with them. And trying to reason with them suggests that they're being unreasonable. And the last thing that an emotionally upset person wants to hear is that they're being unreasonable. So counterintuitively, the practices best associated when emotion is churning look totally different from the ones on the last slide. The best leadership practices to emphasize when emotion is the prevailing issue is self-differentiation, meaning separate yet connectedness. I'll say more about that. And de-triangling, aligning responsibility with authority. I'll say more about that too. So self-differentiation is the practice through which a leader maintains a healthy membrane between themselves and the community they serve. A healthy membrane in a cell keeps it connected with other cells, but doesn't just dissolve into the other cell. A cell in biology that loses its membrane loses its life. It can't survive. But a cell that is not adequately permeable, meaning that substances like fluids and oxygen can get in and out, if a cell isn't sufficiently permeable, it'll suffocate. We need to find that right kind of self-differentiation, which Rabbi Edwin Friedman described as separate yet connected, a separate togetherness where our community knows that we care, but doesn't feel like we care so much that we're just going to go along with them for every emotional ride. There's only one known way for a leader to be consistently self-differentiated: self-care. Through nutrition, understanding, rest, spirituality, exercise, healthy friendships, good marriages, time away. These are the things that leaders have to do, not because they're trying to take care of themselves, but because their self-differentiation has immediate and crucial implications for the health of their institutions. Because when those institutions are dealing with some heavy duty emotions, which many institutions are right now, the leader needs to be separate yet connected in order to be effective. Now, de-triangling, aligning responsibility with authority, comes from the world of emotional systems and psychology. Some call them family systems. So the idea of an emotional system is that emotions are not experienced by individuals. They're experienced in a systemic way across individuals who are in community with one another. So when there's one family member who is genuinely miserable, they might seem fine, but their kid isn't. Family systems are notorious for people placing their emotional burdens on other people in order that they themselves might feel better. And triangulation is just one of the ways that displacement happens. So imagine this. Imagine that Dr. Hoggins and I were in a terrible conflict. I mean, we just completely disagree about something. And that about which we disagree is come to an impasse, and I just can't take it anymore. I just can't take it anymore. So I get on the horn and I call up Judy Brandon, my former advisee, who Judy, I mean, thinks I'm perfect, right, Judy? So I know, yeah, so I know that Judy is going to sympathize. And I'm going to say, Dr. Huggins this and Dr. Huggins that. And Judy's going to say, oh, girlfriend, I hear you. Boy, Sarah, you couldn't be more right. Now I feel better. I feel better, but guess who feels worse? Judy, because Judy really likes Dr. Huggins, and now I've just dumped all of this garbage on her. And now she is the one who's carrying the emotional burden that really belonged to nobody but me to work out with Dr. Huggins. So again, think of those examples. Think of those examples. I bet they're already coming to mind. To de-triangle what would have needed to have happened would have been for Judy to say, Sarah, I love you, but no, just stop the this and pick up the phone and call Jan. I'm not going to take this on. But she would probably be worried that she was going to hurt my feelings or not be there for me. So in that well-intentioned emotional system, things just got really messy. Similarly, religious institutions are notorious for giving people responsibility without power to carry out that responsibility. So de-triangling and aligning responsibility with authority are two leadership practices that we can engage when we sense that there's something unhealthy in the emotional system that look nothing like planning and look nothing like teaching. Rather, they're more about taking a step back without disengaging. How can we get some perspective without causing people to feel like we don't care? You notice I spent at least twice as much time on that slide as the one before. Not a coincidence. As I've said, the degrees of difficulty are going up with each dynamic. Reason, planning and teaching, fine. Emotion, self-differentiation, de-triangling, aligning responsibility and power. Damn, that's a lot of big words. It's a lot harder work, but it's about to get harder again. Because if power is out of whack, if power dynamics are distorting collaboration, here are some of the things that we might not see, but kind of sense. First, we might notice that consensus was completely upended when the one with more resources spoke up. Everybody on the committee was really excited about that candidate, but the one with the most resources, whether those be money or influence or reputation, the one with the most resources speaks up, and suddenly that's the candidate we hire. Fascinating, fascinating. Amidst a heavy-duty power dynamic, reason and emotion become irrelevant. How we get from the math of elections to the political mess we're seeing in states that are enacting new laws about voting has nothing to do with the practice of planning or teaching. It might not even have to do with the emotions, which are running very, very hot. There's something in the power dynamic that is elusive and yet seems like it's got a lot of control. Another marker might be that those with power don't see those without power, and those with less power feel like they have even less power than they do. You'll be part of a conversation about what's best for, in my setting, what's best for your school. And somebody has to remind you that you're actually there for students. Oh, right. Whoops. I was so busy thinking about the budget and the strategic plan that those students, right. It's all about them. Oh, right. Okay. Furthermore, a student will say, I was going to bring this issue to your attention, but I just didn't want to bother you. You seem so busy. course I want to talk to the student. Of course I want to hear from the student, but maybe I came across like I had more important things to do. What a terrible thing to hear. And yet what a terrible thing for me to project. These are just a couple of examples of the seeing problem, where the person with power, and all of us have power in some parts of our lives, the person with power neglects to even notice that there are people over whom they have power. And flip side, those with less power feel even more helpless than they actually are. Again, as I just said, everybody has power in some part of their lives, and everybody is under the influence of power in another part of their lives. Everybody, without exception. And yet power is sneaky and it's elusive, and it sustains itself by knowing how to hide. When we suspect that a power dynamic is at work, we find different types of leadership practices than applied to reason or emotion. And I posit that this is the most difficult of the dynamics to discern, and these are the most difficult leadership practices to carry out. I borrow them all from the world of liberation theology. Okay, so liberation theology, which was developed most notably in Central and South America with agrarian communities, is a style of doing theology that starts from the grassroots up. So a liberation theologian would want to work with an agrarian community on what do you know well, and what are the questions that are emerging for you, and then working from there, as opposed to a different style of doing theology, which would be to take a theological model and impose that on a community. Liberation theology presents the notion that there is no such thing as just the oppressed becoming liberated. No, no. Everybody needs to be liberated, because if that doesn't happen, then when the oppressed become free, they will just become the next generation of oppressors. We need to break the cycle. Paulo Freire, who is Brazilian, a Brazilian educator, very much influenced by liberation theology, used the term conscientization, which I can't say in Portuguese. I'm sure it sounds much better, but conscientization as the engine through which that cycle of liberation could become possible. Conscientization meaning to make people conscious. To make people conscious of how oppressors and oppressed people are just arbitrarily thrown together in a totally meaningless construct that needs to be laid bare and eradicated. Conscientization is the long haul. And we who are people who care about faith and care about community need to be engaged in that long haul toward liberation. But in the intervening time, we can borrow a totally different set of concepts from, of all places, the world of engineering. So engineering professionals and scholars sometimes use an expression called the critical path. The critical path for an engineer is trying to find the right balance between top-down forms of authority and bottom-up forms of authority. So if you imagine the stalactites that come down from the top of a cave, and then the stalagmites that come up, if this were the top, if the stalactites from the top were institutional forms of power, the stalagmites might be the grassroots form of power. A critical path would suggest that you're trying to find where those stalactites and stalagmites meet, or at least get really, really close, and focus on those. In other words, we seek pockets of possibility where those with power and those with less power agree. And then we throw our energy there with the notion that through collaboration on shared enterprises, greater consciousness will emerge. So, again, as I said at the beginning, I thought that this would be kind of an unpopular idea because shouldn't we just bash apart the top-down authority? Short answer, yes, we should, but it might take a while. And in the intervening time, we can focus on shared objectives between those who have a lot of power and those who have less power, with the notion that relationships will start dismantling oppressive relationships through the energies of conscientization and, in my Christian sphere, the work of the Holy Spirit. So before we open up for some discussion, we're going to do a little bit of diagnostic work. I'm just going to give you some examples of some cases, and on your own little piece of paper, you can jot down where you think this particular change is bringing up particular dynamics. So, example number one. You hear a complaint that a person feels they should have been consulted on a decision when such consultation wasn't related to that person's role or responsibilities. Now, this happens in churches a lot. People in churches often have very high expectations for how much we in leadership will seek their permission. And a good set of bylaws can help. But I lift up in this case that this might be a power issue. This person probably won't respond all that well to an explanation for why they weren't consulted. Self-differentiation, meaning me saying, you know what, you're upset, but I'm not coming with you on that ride, might not help a lot either. Instead, if this is indeed a power issue, and I could probably make an argument that it's a reason or emotion issue, but we'll go with power in this case. If this were a power issue, the recommended leadership response might be to discern the pockets of possibility where interests are shared and focus on those. Well, Molly, I'm so sorry that you were disappointed to hear that a decision had been made without bringing you into the loop. Let me tell you a little bit about the implications of this decision, and then let's talk about what's important to you and see where we might find some common ground between what you'd been hoping for and what this decision really means. You note, I didn't withdraw the decision, and I didn't even really apologize for the decision, but instead I tried to point us towards some shared value with the hope that we'd find a pocket of possibility and maybe understand each other better. Okay, next example. You learn that a valued member of the staff that you supervise stopped showing up for work without getting in touch with colleagues or their supervisor. When reached, the person expresses shame and remorse, but offers no explanation. Again, we could probably look at this instance from a perspective of reason. That's so not okay. Power of you're fired. But I'm going to choose to look at it from the perspective of emotion. This might be an emotional issue. The person's clearly experiencing some deep self-loathing and shame that made it impossible for them to even pick up the phone and call in sick. But you know what? If this is really an emotional issue, diving into her problems with her is not the appropriate leadership response. Coming at the staff person with, oh, you must have been this, or you must have been sick, or you must have been having a crisis in your life. No. We're not going to join them in their dysfunction. Instead, we're going to be self-contained and healthy in their general proximity, but not in their direction, in their proximity. The recommended action would be to non-anxiously focus on the organization's mission and the staff member's part in that mission. I would be acting the role of saying, I'm going to be me and you're going to be you because you're responsible for you and I'm responsible for me. And I'm not running away from you. I'm not cutting off ties with you, but I'm also not going to come in there with you because our organization has a mission, and you staff person's issues is not the same as that mission, even though I really care about you as a person, as a human being, as a child of God. Third example, we all know what that test looks like. Never want to have one of those again. An institution's leaders decide to reframe and significantly narrow its mission based on the resources it has available to deploy toward that mission. Narrowing will result in staff cuts, budget cuts, and program cuts. Members of the community at large express that they are stunned. This might be a reason issue. No one will tolerate change if they don't understand that which the change is meant to bring about. People need to understand why a change is necessary. Otherwise, they will reject it. Just like our body will reject a new kidney for which it has not been prepared, even if that kidney could save our lives. A recommended action, if people are reacting because they just don't understand what's happening, might be a public teach-in. A teach-in is an opportunity for people to learn and get their questions answered. If people are very upset and emotional, if people suspect that power dynamics are playing a bait and switch, then we might need to change tack. But from the start, it would seem to me that if people are saying they're stunned and confused, that we should take them at their word and we should try to help them understand things better.